Welcome to the Single Parent Podcast, where we not only come together to discuss the ups and downs, ins and outs of single parenthood, but how we could support one another along the way in order to develop and maintain healthy relationships. I'm your host, Natalie. Thank you once again for joining me for another episode. Today's episode, we're going to discuss generational trauma, sometimes also known as intergenerational trauma. And honestly, I'm feeling like a lot of my family members, a lot of my friends either have gone through it or are going through it. And if they haven't or they don't feel they are, I think they're maybe starting to discover that they've been experiencing generational trauma in their lives. And this is a really sensitive subject. I think that, depending on which generation you're talking to, you might not always get the acceptance in this conversation. And I know it's tough. I know it's hard and I know it's rough to accept certain truths about not just your family, but about yourself. Because the fact of the matter is, any sort of work that you have to do, whether it's on yourself or, with someone else, you have to do it for yourself first. And so, what is generational trauma? It's trauma that extends from one generation to the next. It begins when a group experiences a traumatic event that causes economic, cultural, and familial distress. That definition stuck out to me. I got that from health.com. It was really interesting because I never realized how generational trauma can affect the economy, your culture, and familial distress, just family distress in general. And it was just like, wow, it really made me think back to like, how did I become familiar with generational trauma, right? When did I first started seeing that or thinking about that, or that was something that I really wanted to look a little bit deeper into. And it really started with the way that I saw myself as a parent. It was also, if I want to bring it even further back, how I saw myself as a young woman and as a lady. I realized that, okay, there's certain women in life that they can handle certain things. And, they seem to struggle here or there, but, they're able to kind of pull themselves up and forward. And I felt like I couldn't really do that as a woman. And I had to really realize where that was coming from. And so, but I would say that as a child, I didn't realize that at all. I just really thought that, the way that I saw the world was normal. The way that people around me behaved was the way that I was supposed to behave when I got older. Little did I know that, these adults around me were all going through their own issues. And this is what I was seeing in front of me. So I became familiar with generational trauma in evaluating myself, right? And then myself as a parent. I thought to myself, like, why did I treat my son this way? Like, I was raising my son the way that I was told I had to raise a child. Oh, you got to spank them. Oh, you got to punish them. Oh, you got to take this away. You got to be mean to them, And they didn't say be mean to them, right? But that's what I saw. That's what I felt. That, also when I misbehave, you're supposed to don't speak to me or be mean to me or punish me or make me feel even more shameful than I already do. And, a whole bunch of nonsense that we've continued to pass down from generation to generation. And the fact of the matter is, we don't have to. Like, if we choose to say to ourselves, like I did, I was just like, I didn't like how it felt, the way that I was treating my child. I didn't like his reaction and the way that I saw that he responded to the way I treated him. And I knew that he was confused. Like, what did I do? You know what I mean? In order to warrant my mother being this upset with me. And I'm not saying that it's not to have those conversations with your child when they do things that are wrong. Yes. But does that mean that you need to put them down? Does that mean you need to shame them? Does that mean you need to hit them? Does that mean you need to belittle them? Does that mean you need to bully them? No, I don't think so. And so when I said to myself, you know what, this is no longer going to be a choice that I'm going to make, which is to continue that dysfunction down to my children, right? I want my children to grow up and look back and say, you know what? Not only did I know my mother loved me, I felt that love from my mother as much as she could possibly give it to me. And I also, again, started remembering myself as a child. I think therapy, helps us do that a little bit, because they do ask us like, well, when do you remember feeling like this? And when was the first time you felt this way? And when was the first time you remember this? And it does help you realize where the trauma started and where it came from, right? So for me, I remembered as a child how it felt to, feel a certain kind of way, to feel like, oh, what I said doesn't matter, or how I feel is not as important as how you feel, because you're a parent, or you're an uncle, or you're an aunt, or you're a grandparent. I think that we were taught as kids to put the higher authority feelings ahead of ours. And unfortunately, I think that that's so wrong. I mean, I think that definitely one of the things I do differently with my kids now is I give them a voice. I give them the opportunity to tell me when they're upset. I give them the space to explain themselves. I'm okay with explaining to them certain things that I never got explanations for. And so it's been a little bit difficult, I think, when you're trying to really kind of completely change, not just who you are, but who you are as a parent, right? Yes, again, I've also considered, my parents and how they were raised, other people's parents and how they were raised, and how that definitely factors into their traumas, and how they may have been repeating them unknowingly. But I do feel like, again, as a parent, I love my kids so deeply that not just seeing them hurt, but seeing them hurt because of me is completely devastating to me. And so as a parent, I choose to feel that as long as my kids are not disrespecting me, as long as they're not abusing me, then by all means, I'm going to allow my kids to have their feelings. And there's no way I'm going to make them feel bad about that. There's no way I'm going to belittle my children for nobody. There's no way I'm going to hit my kids for no one. For whoever thinks that is okay, I'm sorry, but it ain't happening. Not with mine. And so also, healthline.com listed some of the effects, right? So you experiencing generational trauma, how are you seeing that that's showing up in your life? And some of the ways which I found interesting are anxiety, depression, heart disease, and PTSD. Anxiety and depression is something that I think I've struggled with all of my life, but I didn't realize I was struggling with it until very recently. And it's really unfortunate, because I think that had I would have gotten the help that I needed and realized that I needed help very early on, especially before I had children, I think that would have definitely prevented a lot of the generational trauma from repeating itself. Heart disease, I think we speak a lot about heart disease and we pin it towards, diet a lot of times, or stress. And so, yes, stress can come from generational trauma, which stems, which exists in family conflict, dysfunction, and abuse, right? And neglect. And the last one was PTSD, right? So those are the 4 effects I found and very interesting. PTSD. I remember speaking to my therapist and telling him about a situation that had happened when I was younger that I will never forget. And that I feel, has what did shape me and was a really pivotal moment in my life at that time as a teenager, and someone who I expected to protect me, you know, kind of did me harm. And it was really sad. And the way that I spoke about it, you know, I thought just happened to everybody, you know. And he said to me, yeah, so you are dealing with PTSD. And I'm just like, what do you mean? You know, and he explained to me, he's like, you know, PTSD is not just for veterans. It's not just for people who, you know, are experienced wars and things like that. Like, that also happens with people every day that you see walking around you, which is baffling to me. But I had to accept that. And I was just like, wow. But it gave me such an ability to then be compassionate towards my own self. It's weird to say that. I finally felt compassion for myself, and I was just like, oh bitch, oh, you not that crazy. It's you was done things, it's just your environment. You know, it's what you had to deal with. And again, not, you know, I will never excuse bad behavior, but it made me realize why for me, I think my trauma manifests more in my self-sabotage than anything else. I think you have a lot of people that do kind of repeat the cycle in their behavior and abuse other people and bully other people and, you know, try to manipulate other people. But then you have those like us who kind of internalize it. And, you know, I'm so shameful. You know, I took on the responsibility of feeling shameful for the things that were done to me. And I didn't realize that I was a kid. Like, I didn't deserve any of that. You know, I deserved to feel protected. I deserved to feel loved and wanted and appreciated and made to feel like I was enough just the way that I was. Like, I didn't have to have a talent. I didn't have to have money. I didn't have to, you know what I mean, be important in any arena. I think as kids, and understand that your child, you know, will want nothing but to make you happy in the end. But I think us as parents, we got to stop, you know, using our insecurities and playing on our kids' heartstrings. And so I found interesting too, because also health.com listed examples of generational trauma. So those would exist in slavery, for example, of black people in America. The Holocaust survivors, they are also, you know, examples of people who experience generational trauma, and the indigenous communities. So like, you know, our ancestors, our Native Americans who were here in this country, on this land, who are owners of this land still, and unfortunately were robbed, all have experienced generational trauma. And, you know, it's interesting to see it in that aspect, but I think it's more important to notice that people that you walk past on an everyday basis experience this. Those people that smile, that are you know, always laughing all the time, always in a good mood, believe it or not, they're experiencing this. And I say this because I know this for a fact, because there are some beautiful people out there who are experiencing generational trauma, and they don't know how to get out of this. They don't know how to save their peace in order to move forward for themselves. Examples in our lives of generational trauma, and this is just a few to name it all, you know, to name a few. Number one is abuse. And I think that's just the most obvious one, but let's also make sure that we're including not just physical abuse, but verbal abuse too. Neglect. So, you know, it's interesting because, well, let's go back to the abuse, right? The physical and verbal abuse. If you look at people who are like that, 9 times out of 10, they saw that in their household, more than likely with their parents. And unfortunately, a lot of people do continue to pass that down, whether they realize it or not. Neglect. If you look at people who don't take care of their children, 9 times out of 10, they also have a parent who didn't take care of them, who neglected them. And so they're, again, continuing to repeat the cycle and continuing to choose to repeat the cycle over and over again. Manipulation and control. Believe it or not, you know, it's not okay to try to manipulate your children. Just because you birth people into this world does not mean that you get the right to control them, especially not, you know, when they're adults. I mean, I've seen it time and time again, and this is what causes a lot of conflict in a lot of families, especially between parents and grown children, is that I don't think we ever really feel respected as adults. And it's really sad and unfortunate because, you know, while you want to respect an older person, an elder family member, you're also not a doormat. You also don't deserve to be mistreated. And so at what point do you stop that behavior? Because guess what? You're free. We're all free to do what we want to do. But I don't have to accept your bullshit. And bullying. Bullying, in my opinion, is just so prevalent in a lot of our cultures, especially as it pertains to the older generation versus the younger generation. And it's really sad. I think that we should be growing and maturing as older people and looking at the younger generations in admiration. I admire these young kids. They are so, fearless. Let's just be real. And it's admirable. And I hate when the older generation loves to chime in immediately after someone says that and goes, oh, but you know, they're so stupid, or they don't do this, or they don't care about that, or they don't pay attention to this. And it's like, and so were we. And when we were younger, we were stupid too. And we did X, Y, and Z. So it's like, okay, you know, give the flowers where they're due. At the end of the day, all of our generations have the ability to affect one another in a positive way. We all have the ability to share with one another. Why would we choose to immediately have something negative to say? Be careful around those people who every time you bring up something or someone, immediately they have a negative thing to say. Why is that your first thought? Why? Frantic behavior. You know, I remember saying to myself, like, no offense, but I was just like, are all Puerto Rican women this way? Like, are they all like fucking batshit crazy and just like, you know, ready to fight people? And, you know, people call it what they want. Oh, they're spicy and, you know, they're this and they're edgy and this. Yeah, no, call it what it is. Could be crazy. Could be crazy. And, you know, while we laugh at it, I think it's really important to take a deeper dive, because at the end of the day, I'm sorry, but I don't think it's cute. I don't think it's cute to, you know, bully the younger girls and, you know, make younger women feel like they're inadequate. You know, again, I remember as a young teenage mother, you know, being told, oh, she a young mother, she don't know what she doing. Look at her. She thinks she grown. She don't know, you know. And it's like, instead of putting me down, why are you not trying to help me? And so those few women in my life that did come along the way and help me and embodied and modeled what it really looked like to be a grown, mature, you know, classy woman. Till this day, I strive to be that. And I'll get there. Substance abuse, you know, I think this is downplayed a lot. You know, I hate when we blame people for certain behavior that we see has been a pattern in their family lines. It's like, why don't we just all be real with one another and call it like it is, and then understand, right, how to stop it, right, moving forward. But I think that that's key. Mental health issues, I think we've all seen it, you know, and don't mistake a woman who's called a strong woman all the time as a strong woman. It may just be she's aggressive, you know, it may just be she has PTSD. And, you know, I think growing up, the misconception that I had was that a strong woman was somebody who was, you know, gonna kick your ass if you came at her, and she gonna protect her family. And yes, that is that. But I think that we also have to remember that it's a woman who, I don't have to always react all the time. You know, I don't always have to have the last word. I don't need to always be right. I don't need to always have an attitude. I don't need to be in a position of authority and use that position of authority to make you feel less than. And that goes for male and females. I think that, again, that goes back to the bullying that I was talking about. You have a lot of that, not only in parental spaces and familiar spaces, but also in education. You have a lot of teachers who, get into those positions of authority only to belittle the children. You see it also in religion. You see pastors and preachers get up on the pulpit and bully people every single Sunday and call themselves men and women of God. And again, you wonder why we have so much trauma, not just in our families, but I promise you, your friends and family are going through the same exact thing. And it's so interesting because I chose this topic, generational trauma, at a time where that is a conversation I've been having with so many people, not just my family members, but friends, people I grew up with. And we've all been through it in some way. Even if we were not directly affected by it, we had a family member who was directly affected by it. And either way, it doesn't feel good, whether you're going through it or to see somebody you love going through it, especially when they don't deserve it. I think the worst kind of trauma you can face is at the hands of your parents. And for me as a parent, that is why I chose to break that fucking cycle, no matter what anybody thinks, and make sure that my kids know that they are loved. And not only that they know they're loved, but that they feel they're loved on an everyday basis. Now, does that make it easy for me? No. Does that mean that my relationship with my kids are so peaceful all the time? Hell no. Because we fight and we bicker. But what I will say is I constantly remember what the goal is for us to always feel connected and loved. And so these fights are going to happen, but they're also going to pass. And when they pass, I want my kids to remember how well I handled those situations so that they could then say to themselves, okay, you know what? That's how I want to raise my kids. Just like that. If you have been affected by generational trauma, if you feel that you've experienced it, I will say this. These are definitely some of the treatments that you might find helpful. Again, taken from health.com. The first is accepting the trauma. You got to accept and acknowledge what the fuck is going on. Not just in your life, but in your familial lineage. Because that's where it's actually started. Acknowledge it. Be honest about it. That's the only way you can move forward. Take ownership and accountability when you yourself are continuing to pass down the generational trauma. You're going to have to be honest with yourself and say, you know what? Yeah, this is what happened to me, but this is where I'm noticing that I'm starting to pass this on. And this is where it's not okay. Pinpointing the signs and symptoms that relate to the generational trauma. So you got to look in your life. I've had to look at myself. Okay, every day I'm yelling at my kids. Like, why? Do I have to yell at them? No. How does it make them feel? So you know what? Let me stop that shit. No lie. It took me like a whole year just to stop yelling at my kids. I was like, this is so way more deep rooted than I thought it was. Waking up angry, agitated, not like making my kids feel like they're a bother to me. I was like, why am I doing that? And when I stopped doing that and really connected with my kids one-on-one, I may not be perfect. I don't always carve out the best of times for my kids. But I say to myself, Natalie, when you have the ability to just sit and focus on your child, what she says, how she feels, how she reacts to your questions, just act silly with her, I'm going to take advantage of that. Because life is not promised, not just for me, but also for my kids. And so I had to do the deep work. And last but not least, resisting the environments that worsen the effects of the trauma. That is my biggest